So, hey guys, I'm just checking in for the week. This week we're working on the introduction to our final paper. So I just wanted to give you some hints, some strategies to approach this. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So what we are looking at is some introduction strategies. So there are all kinds of ways to construct an introduction. The one that you're familiar with the most and the one that we've been concentrating on for these last couple of weeks is using a quote to start your paper. That's fine. But that doesn't necessarily always work when you have these longer introductions, right? So what I'm looking at here are introduction strategies. And so these are strategies that you can use. You can kind of mix and match. You can pick one depending on the needs of the paper. You can kind of go and say, okay, so what would work well for my paper in terms of these introduction strategies? So the first one is that to begin with a quotation. You already know how to do that. But you can also begin with anecdote or a narrative, right? So an anecdote or a narrative could be like a personal story. So for example, if I'm writing about being or animal rights, and I'm a vegan, I can talk about why I became vegan. If it was in fact because I was concerned about animal rights, or if I'm writing about mental health, when I have my own personal story about mental health, I can write about that personal story. So I like that. That's a good way to begin. You can also begin with an interesting fact or statistic. So for this assignment, for this final paper, you must have 2 articles from opposing viewpoints. That is a requirement of this assignment. But once you get those 2 articles, and because those you're going to summarize next week in the second part of the paper, which is your body paragraphs. But once you get those 2 articles out of the way, you can look up other things, you can Google. So say if you want to find a fact or statistic that you feel speaks to your overall topic and you want to use it in your introduction, you can. Facts and statistics usually work really well when they're like startling for the reader, or when they, they tell the reader something that they might not know. So that's also a good way to begin. You can begin with a question or several questions. So you're not answering the questions in your introduction, you're just kind of asking a series of questions that will then be answered as you kind of work through your paper. You can also begin with relevant background material. This is never a bad idea. And so relevant background material just kind of sets up, what you're talking about. So say if you're setting up mental health, that's a huge term. So if you kind of go in and you talk about specifically the background of mental health and which you're going to be focusing on within that, that's super helpful. It's also super helpful for science and technology, where your audience probably won't have a huge knowledge base. So I know someone's writing about cybersecurity, like background information, relevant background information might be super helpful there. Same thing with the next introduction strategy, which is begin with a definition of a term, right? So any term that's really important, you think, to your argument, or you think that's going to be really useful to your reader, you can begin by defining it. Now, you don't want to go to, well, Webster's dictionary says, like if you're going to get a definition, make sure that it's something that's relevant, make sure that it's something smart, and make sure that it's probably not from Webster's dictionary. Okay, so these are some introduction strategies. So here's the introduction prompt. So this week you're only writing, it only has to be 1 to 2 pages. Like that's it. That's all we were looking for in the introduction. It should start with the hook and then introduce the problem. But again, you guys are used to writing an introduction that's a paragraph long. And so now we're asking you, if it's a page, if you make your introduction 1 page, that's at least 2 paragraphs. If you make it 2 pages, that's at least 4 paragraphs. How do you do that? And so I just want to give you some strategies. I do want to point out, we're going to come back to these series of questions that Brian did post, but I do want to point out that at the end of the paragraph, it's specified that the very end of this paragraph, or the end of the introduction rather, should be a short paragraph that does a couple of things. It should state the problem. It should briefly go over the 2 articles that you found in opposing viewpoints. You're not going to summarize them in detail, again, because that happens next week when we start to work on the body. And it should provide your solution. Your solution is serving as a thesis statement for this essay. So here are some sample outlines, right? And again, I'm just mixing and matching from those introduction strategies. So my first sample outline, I'm going to begin with a quote, and then I'm going to have some kind of background of the topic, right? Whatever my topic is. My next paragraph, I'm going to have a narrative, and this is kind of why I care about the topic, my personal story, why this matters to me. And then I'm going to have a startling fact or statistic. And then paragraph 3, which is my last paragraph in this introduction, I have to state the problem. I have to briefly summarize or briefly go over or introduce the 2 articles that I will summarize in detail next week, and I have to state my solution. So that's the first sample. Sample B, and if I do 3 paragraphs for my introduction, again, that should get me to roughly about 1.5 pages. So maybe I'm like, I don't want to begin with quotes. I've been doing that, since this whole thing began. I'm going to try something new. So maybe for my first paragraph in the sample B, I'm going to begin with a narrative or a personal story, because I figure that that's going to be more effective for my paper. You have choices, it's your paper. And then I'm going to do that statistic fact. And then for paragraph 2, I'm going to do some background information, and then I'm going to do a definition of an important term. And then paragraph 3 always remains the same, that last paragraph, because this is the paragraph that helps hit the assignment requirements. I have to state the problem. I have to briefly give a brief overview of the 2 articles that I'm going to be summarizing, and I have to state the solution. Here's my sample C, and this one is a little different because this one, the outline is constructed using that series of questions that Brian Good kind of posted here. So these questions could be a guidepost, right? So you can structure your introduction around why is it a problem? How did it become a problem, right? Why is it a problem that's important to you? Why should it be important to the reader? So that's what I did in this last introduction outline. So my first paragraph, I'm going to begin with a quote. I'm going to begin with some background information. And then my paragraph 2, why is this a problem to me? Why is this problem important? And why should it be a problem for the reader or for the larger audience? And then paragraph 3, it's going to, again, state the problem, state the 2 articles that I'll summarize or that you'll summarize briefly, not in detail, because again, you do that next week, and then you state the solution. So here are 3 different ways to begin, and they're just suggestions. Like if you look over this, introduction strategy list and you're like, maybe I want to do something different, or maybe I want to kind of switch around the order. Whatever makes sense to you or whatever works best for you, that's what you do. But for people who are like, I need a little bit more guidance, this is my attempt to give you a little bit more guidance. So I'm going to stop the share. So as always, I'll post this, of course, and you'll have the outline. I'll post that as well. If you have any questions or concerns, just email me. And again, this is only 1 to 2 pages. Most of you are going to come in and at that sweet spot of 1.5 pages, which is fine. So yeah, good luck. I think you are great. I think you got this. And I'll see you all next week.